So, mate, thank you for joining us despite the technical difficulties of getting on, which obviously people won't know, but we're here and we're chatting. And the reason I got you on, just to give a bit of context for yourself and people, is when I saw your podcast with Personal Best, I believe, and just what you was talking about, and then looking on your Instagram page and seeing the content that you share and what you create. For me, it was super refreshing to see that, especially from the avenue of talking about, male empowerment, male success, something that I think obviously as a man I hold personal to me. But I thought as soon as I seen you, I need this guy on, need to have a conversation with him and understand the journey as to what got you to where you are today. So the best place to start is always the beginning. And if you could share maybe what the eureka moment or the pivotal moment was for you becoming this, male empowerment coach, and what you're doing today, if you want to explain a bit about both.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jack. Nice to put a face to the name and meet you properly on here. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think like all of these things, there's the eureka moment, or that pivotal moment is only really exists in hindsight. We make sense of our story often after the event, and I think that was true of me. Heard something the other day in terms of when you're marketing a product, especially if you're a coach and it's a personal brand and you're looking for people to connect with you, that your avatar is you of 10 years ago. And it's 10 years ago this summer that I left my first career in commodity. And again, with 2020 hindsight, I look back on that moment kind of 9.5, 10 years ago and think in archetypal terms, that was my sort of call to serve and my hero's journey. More prosaically, as kind of somebody a bit more to the point, like Joe Rogan would put it, you might as well be the hero of your own story, right? And in hindsight, that was the moment where I decided to be the hero of my own story, or that was my call to serve. But I wasn't thinking like that at the time, and it's tempting if you're a man listening to this, kind of struggling with anything, to think like it's got to make sense like it does for all of these guys who are on podcasts or who write books or who coach or who have social media followings in this space. Like they all seem to be in command, in control. They all sound quite kind of philosophical, like they've got everything worked out, like they've got it all mapped out. And you don't. Like I didn't then really. And again, I wasn't thinking like this at the time. All I was thinking at the time was, I hate this job. I'm incredibly angry. I don't understand why. I don't really know who I am or what I want. I've got gut issues, digestive issues, kind of, I want to feel better in my body. I want to feel better about my body. Why aren't I as kind of nice as I once was? How have I lost touch with what was meaningful to me as a kid growing up? And that was what was going on. I now look at this through the kind of the lens of hindsight, and I realised it was an identity crisis. I wasn't living a life that felt purposeful, so therefore nothing I was doing, however beneficial to me, felt like it had meaning. And that was the beginning of the kind of search for meaning, if you like. And like a lot of these things, it starts in kind of purely selfish terms. You look after yourself first before you can help other people.
100%.
I wasn't even thinking about helping other people at that point, to be perfectly frank. I was just thinking about looking after myself, right? And I thought, right, well, I need to sort out whatever's going on in my body. I need to start training. I need to look after my nutrition. I need to find out what the hell's going on in my gut. It turned out there was a diagnosis further down the line of Crohn's disease, but I didn't know that then. I need to sort out what's going on kind of mentally here. Why am I on this roller coaster between arrogance and self-loathing and so incredibly angry? And so it was personally, sort myself out was the pivotal moment. And then in trying to do that, and it's by no means a finished job, and I don't think it ever will be, but in trying to do that, I've realized that I've got kind of skills and abilities to help other people, and hence the coaching and what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and something that I definitely wanted to speak to you about was sort of the role of purpose. You've mentioned it there, and you know, I can definitely relate to what you're saying about maybe living a life that you didn't 100% have your purpose locked out. And that's something I struggle with still to this day. Is I think it's difficult to, you know, especially when you're younger, you read all this and you see all these things, especially if you get in the niche and sort of community in which we're in, and sort of self development, self help, well being, is that a lot does refer back to purpose. And I remember when I first started my journey of, being a better version of me maybe 10 years ago, I was like, what is my purpose? And I'm just interested to sort of see, was when you found coaching, was that the turn? Is that where your purpose came in?
Yes, and what I would say, just to contextualize this for you, for everybody that's listening, is that there's nothing wrong with you if you
Mm,
if as a guy you're sat there and you're thinking, this whole purpose meaning thing is difficult. Like, why do I feel impelled to look after myself? Why do I feel impelled to serve myself? And why am I dissatisfied doing that, even though it feels like the natural thing I should be doing? I'm listening to guys telling me I need to serve a cause greater than myself. I need to find purpose. I need to find meaning. But nobody else seems to be doing that. And that requires a great deal of sacrifice. And actually, it feels more natural for me to go and pursue like wealth creation and to get a good job and to make money and to attract the type of woman that I want to be with and look after myself and safeguard myself and sort of, you know, let everybody else look after themselves. There's nothing broken about anybody who feels that way, because it's fundamentally the human experience. It's fundamentally the male experience. Like, if we think about the software that we're all running as humans, as men, it's informed by the pressures of our evolutionary past.
mm,
We, in very crude terms, our sole objective is to propagate our genetic material into the next generation.
yeah,
It's to create more little Jacks, right?
yeah,
But that's your sole biological purpose. So all of your programming is around, right, let's acquire status. Now, because the more status you've got, the more attractive you are as a mate. You've expanded your mating opportunities. You're going to have more children. Therefore, there's a greater chance of Jack genetic material surviving into the next generation. It's as simple as that. We didn't evolve to make it to 35, 40 years of age and to be having existential crisis of meaning and purpose.
yeah, yeah.
Like, that's just like an
I've never thought
emergent
about it like that, and it's absolutely bang on.
that's an emergent property of like the development of our societies and the development of human consciousness and everything else. It's not basically how we were designed through evolution. So first of all, understand, I think, that where these drives come from. The hedonic treadmill, the desire for more, 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 even though you know that it doesn't fill the void within you, that it's not satisfying. And so accept that there's this conflict going on within you. You know, you don't have to choose more, 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 more wealth creation status, or disregard all of it and attempt to live like a monk, because
Yeah,
you're not programmed to do that. So there's a kind of dichotomy here, which is, yes, it's normal and natural to want more and know that ultimately won't satisfy you or deliver you happiness, but there's no point beating yourself up about that and hating on yourself for that, because that's your programming. So let's accept that, let's acknowledge that, let's be aware of that. Then from that position go, okay, now I know that, I now know why it's so scary to give all of that up. Why am I afraid to give up the good job that I know doesn't serve me? Or why am I afraid to take a pay cut to do something more meaningful? Or why am I afraid to take myself out of social groups or friendship groups that I know basically aren't constructive for me, aren't good for me, but I'm going to be judged and people are going to say things and I'm going to be outed from this social group or this friendship group. And ultimately what we're afraid of there is not having enough, of being cast out of the group um, that we need to exist within in order for us to survive. Again, this is evolutionary programming, to die alone in the wilderness, essentially. And if we've got the awareness of how our evolution has shaped our psychology, it becomes a little bit easier to go, okay, I understand my desire for all these things that don't bring me happiness, and I understand why I'm shit scared to give up all these things that I was told and thought would bring me happiness that haven't. Now, from that place, I can think about, okay, what actually might feel purposeful to me? And I think if our sole purpose is to feel happy and content, that can feel selfish, but in reality, it isn't. In reality, that serves, because in order for you to find happiness and contentment, you've got to get out your own head. You've got to look beyond your personal interests, because you won't actually find happiness and contentment and something that feels purposeful and meaningful unless you're helping your fellow man. So it all comes together like that, I think.
I mean, that was excellently put, and you touched on so many topics there that again I can relate with, especially about, as you grow up, you realise that some of these friendship groups that seem so, they were so much a part of your identity and who you were, and then you realise that actually they provide me no benefit. But with societal pressures, and I think a lot of it, from my personal experience, does come back to these societal pressures that are expected of men. And I think it's a very conflicting message that we get in today's society of how we should feel and who we should be. We shouldn't be too masculine, because then that's toxic, but then we shouldn't be too feminine, because that's not, attractive to mates, or this, that, and the other. And it's walking this fine line. And then that even comes back to being in friendship groups. So, to hear you put it so eloquently and explain it is brilliant. And it's reassuring, even for me, just to hear someone else say it. And so I'm hoping that when other people listen to it, they get that reassurance as well. And it segues very nicely into something that I wanted to talk to you about. You covered it a little bit, talking about, the challenges of our understanding our evolution and obviously the modern world, and we're not really wired to have these and make it to 35, 40, like you said, which I've never thought about before, and is a brilliant way of thinking about it. But in your role now, seeing men on a regular basis and their journeys and their challenges, what are the most common obstacles that men face when they're seeking this self-empowerment and to be a better version of themselves?
Yeah, great question, and I'm pleased that's where it ended up, because I wanted to come back on something you were saying there about the two sort of archetypes of modern masculinity that the media, the broader social situation seems to be offering us. As you said, you can be too masculine and that's considered toxic, or you can not be masculine enough. And I think in very, very crude terms, you're offered kind of woke male feminism or toxic masculinity.
100%.
And the polarization of what it is to be a man it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a general political, social, cultural polarization, isn't it? Like everything is become 2 points of extremists just shouting at one another, not properly communicating with one another. And I think our role of men is to have the conversation around what healthy masculinity looks like, because it doesn't look like either of those two polar extremes. And hopefully in time we can have that conversation with women about what healthy femininity looks like, and we can inform each other, and it's best for all of us. And that is to say that sort of identity crisis within masculinity is what I see the most with guys that I'm coaching. So to answer your question, what are the biggest issues? Like, I don't mean male and female when I say masculine and feminine here, but if we think about traditional masculine energy, is much more about responsibility. It's about, nobody's going to do this for you. Get out of bed, pull your socks up, work harder, and stop complaining, right? it's all about responsibility. It's about order. It's about structure. Hence why there's so much stuff in the manosphere about just work harder, or it's about productivity hacking, or it's about the perfect morning routine, or it's about how you carve out efficiencies out of your day. It's about structure, order, responsibility. And then traditional feminine energy is more sympathetic, it's more empathetic, it's more accepting, it's more, yeah, okay, well, that's happened now. Don't worry too much about it. You know, be kind to yourself. And as men, we need both that masculine and that feminine energy. So what I
Yeah.
see the most is driven guys who are incredibly scared to show themselves any sort of forgiveness, any sort of kindness, who are so afraid of being arrogant that they actually have no pride in any of their achievements. So they've got drive without pride. So they're actually doing great things in the world, but they don't stop to acknowledge them. They don't stop to develop any sort of healthy pride around what they've achieved. And therefore, they don't focus on strengths, but they only focus on weaknesses. But they focus on weaknesses not in an accepting, forgiving way. They focus on their weaknesses in a fearful, self-loathing way. So they're stuck in these distracted thought loops where they're almost running and fighting against who they don't want to be, or the shadow sides of themselves that they're not proud of or that they're ashamed of, rather than giving themselves the time and the space to be like, do you know what? I'm a pretty good guy. I don't need to hammer myself constantly for what I'm not. If I actually just sat in my authenticity a bit more, I'll make the right decisions. I'll do the right things. I'll work hard enough. And it'll be a lot more fun because I'll be present, I'll be more playful with it, I'll have more time for people I love, and I might actually kind of get the reason why I'm here as opposed to constantly hammering myself.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring it back to the broader conversation, it comes back to that fear of stepping off the like treadmill. If they, they'll tell me things like, well, if I give myself an inch, I'll take a mile. I'm just going to constantly hammer myself. And of course, they produce as a result, but they produce in this really time consuming, really draining, really sort of self-loathing way, which leaves them with more stuff and bigger businesses and greater achievements, but with more dissatisfaction, a greater concern for what does it all mean? This all feels rather pointless, So the success comes at a real cost.
Yeah, it feels almost superficial, doesn't it? Sometimes when you chase the wrong things. I've been fortunate to have jobs at a young age that paid pretty well. You know what I mean, nothing exceptional, but for like a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, and you sort of think, oh God, I've got this now. All my problems are solved, and then you get that first paycheck, and you're like, oh, nothing's changed. Nothing's actually changed. All the problems that I still feel internally and like the internal monologue hasn't particularly changed. But again, that comes from almost, I think, when you go back to school and college, and it's like, get the well-earned job, be the person, be the boss, be the director, and work your way up. And I'm not saying they don't have places in society, because they definitely do, but there's definitely a message that is sort of over and over just pumped into you from a young age. And I think for men, a lot of the literature is so outdated, and we don't really have. I mean, well-being wasn't even a thing we particularly talked about until when 10 years ago, and now it's probably more in the mainstream in the last few years of something that we need to be there. And I think when you look at people like similar ages to us, it's only very recently that they're starting to think about these things, and hopefully society takes this shift where it does get brought up into schools, it does get brought up into colleges, and in 10 years it might be something that someone finds in an archive and goes, fucking hell, what were they even on about? It's almost archaic that men felt like this, and that's obviously the big picture. But it's so interesting to hear you talk about it, and obviously with the experience that you have, and it segues again nicely into the next part of the question is success. So we've talked there about the regular challenges and the obstacles that you see when dealing with it. But what are the reoccurring themes and behaviours of a successful man? Someone that, has gone from one end of the particular spectrum of feeling this way, and then, having that more self-fulfillment and happiness.
Yeah, if I think about their philosophy and then maybe think about, well, what are they actually doing on a daily basis in terms of their habits that help support that? Like, philosophically, he's self-aware. So he understands what motivates his drives, and I think he's aware of that of the evolutionary pressures. He's aware that the pursuit of more is normal and natural, but it's not his only choice. He's aware that the fear of, we fear as human beings, as men, we fear a loss greater than we cherish a potential gain. There will be, and that's because in our evolutionary past, you could have taken a risk that would have got you slightly more food than you have now, but you also could have lost everything that you had. And losing everything that you had would have meant death. It would have been lethal. It would have been a lethal decision. So you'd have gone, oh, I'll kind of get by on what I've got. I won't take the risk to have slightly more than I've got because I might lose everything. So we fear the loss more than we're driven to even to achieve the thing, to the money, the status. Anyway, so once you're wrapped into the cycle, it's really, really, really very difficult to kind of overcome the fear of getting off. But anyway, I think a successful man has that self-awareness, and he appreciates that there isn't a polar position that works for him or works for anybody else. That actually there's nothing wrong with acquiring wealth. There's nothing wrong with desiring status. But if he's going to find any satisfaction, and if his life is going to carry any meaning, and if his legacy is to mean anything at all, he's going to give back. He's going to use the resources that he's acquired, the knowledge that he's acquired about himself and about the human condition, to try to help other people. And he's going to have a cause greater than himself, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to get out of bed every day and to continue to sort of push through in life. And that cause might be his immediate family. It could be local, it could be his children's school, it could be the local football team or sports team, it could be his church, or it could be something on a much, much grander scale. And that's just about resources and opportunity. Whether you're helping out with your local football team or you're trying to take human beings to Mars, it's exactly the same desire. You've just got different resources you can deploy, right? And in terms of what underpins the awareness and the exploration of purpose and having a kind of direction for your life every day, it comes back down to journaling. I think through journaling, you can be your own therapist. I think anything that can help you achieve a modicum of mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's breath work, whether it's going out for a run, lifting weights, whatever, that's great. And you definitely want that to be part of your system. But then once you found that mindfulness, structurally, what's your purpose? What is your mission? Map that out. Get practical with it. Don't let it be kind of just blue sky thinking, down to the whim of what sort of mood you wake up in today, but actually, like, what are the goals that are going to help me deliver that mission? And what are the things I need to do today to actually push that forward? So it's that awareness around, okay, I accept myself for who I am. I accept all the reasons why I can't be asked today, and I'll be kind to myself about that. But also, this mission's important to me. I'll remind myself why it's important to me. I'll remind myself what the goal is for the next few weeks and months. And then I'll think about, okay, I need to do these 3 or 5 things today to make that happen. And so it's that daily kind of reorganization of the male mind that I think's so important, and what lies behind Guy's success.
Yeah, but obviously, I'll ask you a question later on about habits and routines, but I think I might have just got a couple there from a few spoilers from what I'm anticipating. A question that just cropped into my mind then, obviously we're talking about the successes and we mentioned previously about the challenges, is, when you get these men come to you looking for change, do you see reluctance in trying some of these routines like journaling, which again, going back to what we was talking about before about these two architectural types of, being too masculine and almost being feminine? I feel that journaling is getting much more in that middle ground where it should be, but it's still maybe slight. The scales lean towards being seen as a feminine thing. Do you see any reluctance from your clients as being like, oh well, why should I do that? They've still got that little seed of doubt about it.
Yeah, I would say it's a little seed of doubt. Sorry, it's a great seed of doubt. It's a massive
Yeah.
seed. The reluctance is actually a shield for a huge amount of fear
Mm,
and distrust. And I think that's fear of, it comes back to identity. Being asked to do something different to serve yourself is a challenge to your identity. Now, we all want to exist within our comfort zones. We know growth lies outside of our comfort zone, and we accept that we're gonna have to face some sort of challenge, but that's logical. And most of the time, we're thinking emotionally.
mm,
And even if what we know is not at all comfortable, if what we know is addiction, if what we know is repetitive behavior, if what we know is causing us problems and isn't actually helping us in life, either helping us as individuals or helping us establish any sort of mission or purpose, is still what we know. So it might not feel physically comfortable, but it's emotionally comfortable to stay as we are. So any sort of challenge to your identity is difficult. And what you're saying when you're advising somebody to start sort of journaling is you're saying challenge your identity. Like challenge the stories you tell yourself. Don't assume that voice in your head is right and is in your best interests.
yeah.
Look at it, assess it. But then also don't freak out that there's something wrong with you or that you're broken.
Yeah.
Like you almost need to become a dispassionate scientist where your field of study is your own mind.
Mm,
And that's, I think, there is something cathartic about words on a page, but it's much more than that as well. Separating yourself from your internal narrative by taking it out of your head and putting it on a page in black and white helps you get that bit of dispassionate distance that helps you go, hold on here, does this make any sort of sense or is this complete bollocks?
yeah.
And is this story just a version of a slightly different one I was telling myself last week? Because essentially I'm scared to fail, so I'm going to tell myself, no, I'm not going to go for that job. I'm not going to go for that promotion. I'm not going to ask for that pay rise. I'm not going to ask that girl out that I fancy. I'm not going to put my hand up and ask for more responsibility. I'm not going to go to apologise to my dad, whatever it is, because the voice is going, no, you're all right. You're fine. You don't need to worry about that. Just stay in your lane. It'll be okay. Right. So we need to have a look at that sometimes and go, okay, I get what I'm telling myself here, but what might be the underlying belief? And when we then start looking at those underlying beliefs, it's like, well, who's Rory? Who's Jack? What do I believe? What do I stand for? How was that shaped? And that's a big undertaking, and you've got to want to go there, and that's scary, and yeah, it demands a lot of you.
There's
And
a vulnerability towards it, isn't there?
yeah,
And I think societally, we're afraid of being vulnerable as men. And, even just through doing this podcast, it's been a journey of allowing to be more open and be honest, and then putting it out there for loads of, loads of people to hopefully see. But like I said, you mentioned about it being cathartic. And in the last podcast I did, it was just me talking to the camera, reviewing the year past. And I said that this almost has become a video journal for me when I do these episodes. And when I walk away from them, my mind just feels so much clearer, and journaling is so powerful. And again, it's a bit like meditation. It has that connotation of being almost feminine or hippie-ish, and there's like I said, a general reluctance to it. I don't think as well, like as you've just explained it brilliantly there, but it has to be experienced to be believed. I think journaling and meditation and the rewards that you get from that. Would you agree?
Yes, I want to dig into something you said there because it's so important as part of this conversation, and
Mm.
we get to use your example and the example of your podcast here, which I think is really, really helpful. But you talked about vulnerability, and you talked about the podcast forcing you to be more vulnerable, and then the benefits you've enjoyed. What I heard there, the subtext that I heard there is, I'm a man just like anybody else, and so I'm afraid of vulnerability. And the podcast has made me lean into my fear of vulnerability. And in leaning into my fear of vulnerability, I've realized that actually there's a great deal of benefit to be had in me being more vulnerable. But I was made to do it through the podcast, right?
Mm.
But you'd have never have started a podcast just to be vulnerable. You started a podcast for a reason. And I'll let you tell me what that is in a moment, but there is something bigger than you that you are doing this podcast for. There is a mission that Jack is on, and the podcast is part of that, and it's serving something greater than you. And because the desire to serve that mission is more compelling to you than the fear of stepping into your vulnerability, you're prepared to get on the podcast and be vulnerable. But without the mission, without the sense of purpose, without this idea that you're helping something bigger than you wouldn't step into your vulnerability. Because why would you? Because it's scary, right? So we need something as men that is bigger than the fear of being vulnerable, or the fear of challenging our beliefs, or the fear at looking at our identity. There has to be something bigger that we're emotionally connected to that makes us go there. And is that true for you? Is the podcast and are you prepared to be vulnerable on the podcast because it's serving a purpose greater than yourself?
100%, man. And actually, like I've got goosebumps. You can't see it, but like you've sort of just contextualized it in a way that I've never been able to say it. And like I couldn't agree with you more as to what you've just said. And for me, the podcast is and always will be something that is to try and help people that have been that are in a position that I found myself in years and years ago and still deal with. Like you said before, it's a journey that I don't think has a finish line. You just adapt and get better throughout the race, but you've just got to keep running the race to get better. And my journey has been up and down, and I wanted to create something that could just provide one person with the insight to feel that it's not just me. And I think getting people on like yourself and other people from, other niches and businesses in the community in general life, and that's why it's called the Average Jacks podcast, is because it's meant to be, the everyday person giving their everyday insight. And if that can just relate to one person and they can feel some solace in it or some community in it, or get just one habit that can help them change their life in, the right nature, then that is what the purpose of this podcast is.
And you were talking about one habit there, and okay, you quite rightly come back to me and say, well, journaling's a habit.
Yeah.
Habits will never trump fear. And back to this thing about we can design the best morning routine for ourselves as men. We can have all of the best habits, but our limiting beliefs, our non-useful thinking, our self-critical inner voice, and the fear that all of those things are predicated on will always take over and derail you. If you want to stop drinking alcohol, great, until you're emotionally challenged. And then negative survival emotions like fear and guilt and shame and everything else will take over, and the habit alone won't be enough. There has to be a reason why you want to stop drinking alcohol that is serving a cause that's greater than you. Or on the positive side of things, you want to start training, you want to start going to the gym. Again, there has to be a reason greater than you, or it has to be, you have to see it as serving your mission. You go, well, I'm not going to drink alcohol and I'm going to train because actually that puts me in the best possible state to execute this task. And this task is key to me achieving this goal. And if I can achieve this goal, then I'm delivering on my mission to help person A. And you have to see it like that and in that context, because otherwise it's just, well, I've got to train and I've got to stop boozing. But why? There isn't a compelling reason to overcome the fear, the guilt, the shame that comes with any sort of stressful challenge in life.
What's powering it, isn't it? It's like the fuel. Make sure the fuel is the right thing to be taking it in the direction in which you want to go. And, I've never heard that before, and it makes perfect sense.
Yes, yeah, the fuel. Think of the fuel as is the like pull, and we've got like the push pull. So your kind of motivation or your willpower to do dry January or to start training 4 or 5 times a week, that's a finite resource. Like that's your push. This is just for me. I know it'll be good for me. Let's will myself to do these things, right? But that's going to run out in 2-3 weeks, maybe 2-3 months if you're really lucky. But it's going to run out. Whereas the direction, the vision, the mission, that's the pull. It's like, okay, now I don't just have to rely on willpower and grit and determination, but I can be uplifted and attracted towards something that I desire. And now we've got a limitless source of fuel. Now, because if the mission lights you up and it puts a fire inside of you, as you say, you're always running a race with no endpoint. So that's a permanent kind of source of fuel, that pull. I've just got to will myself to do this because I think it would be good for me. That's going to run out. That's a finite resource, that push. And we need both, don't we? Sometimes we just get our asses out of bed and go and do the thing. There are some days where we need that, but let's save the motivation and the willpower for those days when we're really struggling. And the rest of the time, let's zone in on like what's inspiring us. What are we being pulled towards? What are we serving? And I've said no single habit trumps fear. But the one single habit that's going to help you overcome fear is journaling, because it's the only part of your daily system that allows you to acknowledge the fear, understand where it's come from, accept that there's nothing wrong with you, or that you don't lack masculinity, or that you're not less of a man for being afraid of change or afraid of taking an opportunity or afraid of failure or whatever it might be. It allows you to make sense of that, contextualize it, accept it, and be like, okay, I'm going to go and do this thing anyway, because you demystify the fear.
Yeah, it's addressing the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why the expression is there, and that comes straight to mind when you was mentioning there about addressing it and seeing it. And going back to what you said, I almost feel like when I see motivation and discipline, I almost see it as like this weighted seesaw, and like, discipline is the one that's always there, but you need them both. It's this fighting battle between them, isn't it? But like I said, motivation is normally the first thing to run out. It is for me. I imagine it is for a lot of people. But when that seesaw is weighted and that motivation is taking priority, you've got to tune into it, use it, but then you've got to find, like you said, you've got to find the reason what's going to keep you getting up, keep you getting out of bed, keep you turning up, and why are you doing that? And for a long time, I didn't have that. And, there's probably still some things that I do today where I'm doing them not for the wrong reasons, but not for something that is adding strings to my bow of my personal purpose.
Yeah. What is your personal purpose?
Go on, sorry. So my personal purpose. Whoa, it is a difficult question. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, I've got this mapped out. I know what I am and who I am, and definitely this, because it's something that as an individual I've toyed with, like had the thought I've had it and realised I've not. And I think doing this, the podcast and coming back to it, it does help me with my purpose. I think naturally, like, I'm someone that likes giving back. Like when I've done coaching in the past and things, there's a sense of reward there where I don't get that from anything else. And you sort of epitomised it perfectly before. Without giving back, I don't think you can feel maybe, a true sense of happiness or things like that, because there isn't anything, even if it's just, I take my fiance out, or I get her a gift, or, we do something nice. And if that can be for anybody, your colleagues at work or your friends, that gratification, maybe the wrong word, right word, that you get from that and that sense is just not reciprocated anywhere else for me. So I think it is to, give back and help others. And I don't want that for saying like wanky or philosophical, just because we're on a podcast that's about that. But I think it's true. I think cliches are often cliches because they're right. And for me, that would be probably my personal purpose, is to just help others be a better version of themselves.
Yeah, we'll do a bit of live coaching if you don't mind.
Yeah, fire away.
Exactly, you've epitomised exactly what we're talking about here. Now, obviously, you have a purpose greater than yourself, so you're prepared to lean into the vulnerability and you're prepared to say things about giving back to others and gratification, and you're not worried about saying that out loud. So you've got a sense of mission that trumps your fear. But even you just then said, that might sound a bit wanky or a bit philosophical. So there's a voice in your head going, Jack, you sound a bit wanky or philosophical, right? Right? And that's what most of us are walking around with most of the time. Now, you're leaning into your vulnerability, but that won't be common. The common experience for a man will be, I could do this today, or I could say this to this person. Well, that's a bit wanky and philosophical. I'm not going to do that. I'll be judged for that. I won't. They'll take the piss out of me for that. They won't want me to come out with them on a Friday night if they think I'm just going to wang on about, gratitude and philosophy and whatever else. So, I'll just keep that to myself. And that's what I'm talking about. I know I'm banging a drum here for journaling, but that's what I'm talking about in terms of journaling, is we get to sit there in the morning and go, I've had this thought. My immediate story I'm telling myself is that's wanky and philosophical. Okay, what's the underlying belief? Why am I telling myself the story that's wanky and philosophical? Because that's a feminine thing for a man to think. That's a feminine thing for a man to say. Now, if we don't challenge that limiting belief, we don't lean into the vulnerability, we don't have the conversations that need to be had. So well done for leaning into the vulnerability, but also thank you for giving me a great example for us to go. Because even you're a guy with a podcast who talks about this stuff all the time. And you're still running the story. It's wanky and philosophical to say these things. And so am I. So if anyone listening to this, again, it's normal, it's natural. Understand where that belief comes from. Understand that there's some societal, cultural programming about what it is to be a man. But also understand that there's evolutionary pressures at play, and it's not about you as an individual guy you can be whoever you want to be. I mean, there are certain things that are more healthy and supportive for men in terms of mindsets and habits and behaviors, but your brain is plastic. You can challenge those beliefs. You can change that internal narrative, and therefore you can change your life.
Perfectly summed up. I mean, I know for a fact, almost when I say them things, I know I'm reverting back to a previous version of myself and where I come from and the community in which I grew up and what's expected of a man or a young man or a boy in them areas. And that is something that has been difficult, because obviously I'm up north. I'm from Wigan. Like, it's a very working class town. There's an expectation. You play rugby, you do this, and You know, like you come from generations where they fucking worked in the pits and they didn't grumble and they didn't say this, and that is still to a degree there. So when you have these passions and these interests in things like this, and stoicism, philosophy, albeit that is for me when I was 18, 19 was definitely almost a conflict of identity to be like I felt like I shouldn't like these things, and I don't know if that's something that you felt when you came into these. But a question I wanted to ask you on top of that is, did you ever deal with imposter syndrome, or still dealing with imposter syndrome whilst doing this? Because for me personally, and again leaning into the vulnerability, is even having this conversation with you this morning. I texted my fiance last night. I was like, I'm shitting myself for this. Like I just felt a nervousness, which I do for most podcasts. But again, like I'll be honest and say that. And I think people just assume that, you do these podcasts and you think, they're a confident, open person.
Well, again, great vulnerability, and thanks for sharing that. Yes, imposter syndrome is something that I still grapple with now. Funnily enough, the more aware I've become, the bigger the imposter syndrome has become, in a way.
Yeah.
Now, I've become better at dealing with it, but it's also become more apparent.
Yes.
And there's an irony there. My first career, and I think this is true for a lot of men throughout their 20s, and this isn't a bad thing, by the way. Like, we're men. How old are you, Jack?
I'm
28. Okay, so you've basically got there early, essentially. You're ahead of the curve in terms of being a 28-year-old guy having these conversations and understanding these things about himself. Like, well done for that. Our 20s for us as men are really about striving, thinking that the job, the money, the attractive woman, the watch, the car, whatever will bring us happiness, and wanting to make more. And that's great for society because it's productive, because it produces things and it creates wealth and it employs other people and it makes products. Or, a couple of generations ago, it got coal out of the ground that we needed to run our economies. If our grandfathers were sat around debating the philosophical use of them going down the pit, then no one would have gone down the pit and there'd have been no energy. And undoubtedly we've advanced in terms of our material comfort because we've gone and mined resources out of the ground and built power stations and plumbed in toilets and everything else. We can come back to that. So you need a certain amount of, well, fuck it, I'm going to go out into the world and make something of myself, for me, purely for selfish reasons. And I think that's what our 20s are about as men, and that we usually become a little more questioning of that narrative as we approach midlife. I did it at 30. You're doing it even younger than me. I just think we were slightly ahead of the curve, Jack. That's all. But my point is that back then, I had no imposter syndrome because I had a hugely inflated ego. I was very, very arrogant. I was like, no, I can do that. I can, even if I can't, I'll convince somebody that I can. So imposter syndrome has actually become more apparent as I've become more self-aware. So I've got better tools to deal with it, but it's now something that I know exists for me. But it comes back to leaning into vulnerability and to the mission. I think when you don't have a reason to be vulnerable, when you don't have something that trumps the imposter syndrome, you would cancel the podcast. You wouldn't do the thing. You wouldn't put your head above the parapet. You wouldn't go for the promotion. You wouldn't start the business. You wouldn't start the charity, because there'd be nothing to overcome the imposter syndrome. So I think it's a twofold thing. It's one, going, okay, this is imposter syndrome at play here. Let's sit back dispassionately and go, okay, am I qualified to speak to this guy on this subject? Yes, I am. I've done it many times before. I've made many podcasts. In fact, it's good if I know less than the guest, because then I'm going to ask the questions that the listener's going to want to hear. And you can go through that whole dispassionate thing that you probably did, where you're like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I'm feeling this way. It's actually a benefit. It's a benefit to me. It's a benefit to the listener, right? And then you've got the other side, which is, and I've got a bloody good reason to overcome this imposter syndrome. Because what if this is the podcast that saves somebody's life? Fucking hell, I better do it then. I better overcome this imposter syndrome and hit record and start having this conversation, because this isn't about me and my imposter syndrome. This is about something bigger than me. And it's having the awareness of that it's normal and natural to have the imposter syndrome, and it's also having a reason to be scared or feel like an imposter and still roll your sleeves up and get to work anyway. But the point about, I want to go back to this, the idea of being from Wigan and coming from generations of men who did hard, dirty jobs, right? Part of that is the kind of the issue that we're facing, in that we're probably the first generation of men for whom it's not guaranteed that our sons' lives will be better than our own. In that, when our grandfathers were striving, they could see their lives getting materially better in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
And so our fathers, in terms of, it might have been social justice, but it might have just been like having a telephone in your house, or having a colour TV, or having an indoor toilet, or having central heating and not having to light a fire. It was apparent and material that if you went out and worked, your existence got better. And so you could see that, okay, if we continue on this trend, my children's lives will be better. That's worth getting myself down a pit for.
Yeah.
Whereas we sit in this place of this perverse place where we've never been more comfortable. Life has never been easier. I can get, within seconds now on my phone, I can achieve my two main drives, in that I can achieve my drive for sex by just calling up pornography in 2 seconds, and I can order takeaway and achieve my drive for food within about 2 seconds, right here on a device. So in many ways, our lives have never been easier, but at the same time, we're in this sort of moral, political, social crisis where we can't say with confidence our children's lives will be better than our own, from a political point of view, an environmental point of view, from an identity politics point of view. Right, so it's a weird, confusing place where we're really comfortable and really uncomfortable all at the same time. And so I think that's why we're having these conversations, because the path through this doesn't feel clear. It doesn't feel apparent. And you're like, well, clearly the solution here is not just to work harder, because I don't think that's going to overcome the issues that I face or the issues that we face societally. But clearly the issue isn't also, the solution isn't to just sit around and wax philosophical and do nothing about it either. So like, how do we find our way through? And that's why I think it's great that you have this podcast and that you have the conversations that you have, because somewhere amongst all of these is a key part of the conversation that needs to be had around, like, what's healthy societally, and then as men, like, what's our role in that,
100%.
How much do we need to lean into responsibility and structure and take action, and how much do we need to lean into empathy and acceptance and love and understanding, and how do we get that balance right, and how do women get their own balance right, and how do we meet them as their best selves, as our best selves, and how do we sort all of this shit out, basically?
Yeah, and like I said, I think we're all so connected now through devices, and we have the opportunity to have these conversations. And again, selfishly, I feel like it's a privilege to do this and just speak to, people like yourself, the people that I wouldn't have the opportunity to through the avenue of a podcast, but also it tells us back into that purpose, which you mentioned, having them selfish traits to be better and serve yourself, but also combine it with the purpose. So I'll be honest with you, mate, this chat again has motivated me and given me a capacity to look and reflect on myself in a way that I might not have done before this. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And I think another thing we don't do in society enough is tell people, we appreciate them and what they provide us. So yeah, I'm gonna lean into it again and say thank you for the chat. And the little bit of coaching you did there, excellent, loved it. I got so much from it. And segueing into that, I wanted to sort of give you sort of the opportunity to talk about the Man Defined event that you're doing, and what that entails and how that could benefit men.
Yes, well, thank you for your kind words, first and foremost. That's those kind of moments, like the moment you experienced there, is why I'm doing this. So it's a privilege, really, mate, to be honest. It's lovely that you're thanking me, and thank you for leaning into that. But like those sort of moments where you see something click for somebody is why I get out of bed in the morning. So again, thanks for the opportunity. In terms of the Man Defined event, I want to invite you. I want you to have, following our conversation, if you're available and you can make it, I want to make that a free day for you. I want you to come and experience it.
Yeah, man, definitely a bit for that.
I don't ask for anything in return, but if you wanted to do something for me in return, you would like record your thoughts on it and maybe tell your listeners about the key lessons that you learned on the day. And then through you, I get to help some other people, your reflections and your lessons. So if you're available on Sunday, the 16th of Feb, and you can come down to Until on Charing Cross Road in Soho, then I'd love for you to be part of that event.
We'll sort that out after this, mate. I'm sure we can try and figure something out.
Yeah, perfect. So what we're going to do there on the day, Jack, really is we're going to start in the only place we can start in terms of the conversation around masculinity, and that's with us as individuals. So the premise is that as men, we need to get that balance right between taking responsibility and showing ourselves empathy. And that as we approach midlife, we need to understand why we're striving. We need to look after that side of ourselves so we can continue to provide for ourselves, for the people that we love, and for our cause. But we now, from that position of power, from the position of having acquired some resources and enjoyed some good fortune, we're now going to think about a cause that's greater than ourselves. So we're going to think forward to the last 24 hours before we die, and we're going to look back on our lives as if they'd already happened and decide, well, kind of what is this all about for me? What's really meaningful? What am I going to focus on? And then we're going to get into the practicality of setting some goals to get us there. And we're going to do all of that in a group of like-minded men who are going to hold each other to account during the event and after the event, so that we turn grand plans into reality instead of just having a nice day of blue sky thinking. But really, fundamentally, what it's all about is we want to level up in all areas, and we want to find balance between what I think are the three pillars of masculinity, right? So I think we get the very best out of ourselves as men when we are strong providers, when we can stand on our own 2 feet, first and foremost, and we can provide for ourselves, and then we can provide for our family, and then we can provide for our community, and hopefully then we can provide for all of humanity. But it gets the best out of men to lead, to have a cause, to have a mission. So what's that first and foremost, right? What is that for you? How do you level up in that area? Then we look at the second pillar, which is like you as a lover. So when you're not striving, when you're not providing, when you're not a pillar of your community, when you're not working on your mission or your cause, are you the best fiance, husband, boyfriend, son, brother, friend you can be? Like, are you leaning in to how great men can be as friends, as partners, and are you getting the most out of that romantic and friendship side of your life? Right, because that needs to be there as alongside of all the striving. And then the third pillar that I think is so important for men and probably underpins our ability to show up in our relationships and serve our mission is our athlete, right? Are we looking after our bodies? Are we training? Are we nourishing ourselves well? Are we looking after the physical fundamentals that are going to affect our mental health? And have we got all those three pillars in place? The provider, the lover, the athlete. Because if we have, we're then going to show up as the best version of ourselves, and we're going to think about helping more than just ourselves, right? So that's what the whole day is about. It's about going away, going, right, I know what I'm going to do to level myself up and find balance in these three areas of my life that I know underpin my happiness and contentedness as a man. I'm going to make some friends in the process, and I'm going to stop and think about the bigger picture and how my life looks for the next 40, 50, 60 years. Because very rarely do we do that. And if we only get one chance this year to do that, then let's put our phones aside, get around like-minded people, and spend a whole day getting really clear on how our life is going to look. So that's what it's all about.
Sounds brilliant, Matt. And like I said, I'd love to be a part of it. We'll definitely sort that out and see if we can get the logistics right of that. And I would definitely, reciprocate the favour and, maybe getting you on again or us going through it and having a chat, because you've got a partner in it, haven't you, as well? Another gent who's helping you with it.
I've got a collaborator called Danny who's collaborating with me on this event. He's looking after the more physical side. I'm looking after the more psychological side. So just think he's body, I'm mind, basically. He's going to take everybody through the physical testing, because what we're going to do, we're not ignoring the physical here. We're saying, look, we're going to test your VO2 max. We're going to test your strength. We're going to test your body composition. We're going to give you a nutrition plan. We're going to give you a training plan. Not because they're the most important things, but they just look after the fundamentals, which then allow you to show up, start that business, start that charity, get that promotion, be a better husband, whatever it is. They're underpinning that. And then on top of that, with you and your journal, you can work out what the good life is for you, how that serves other people, and practically what you need to actually do to make it happen.
Sounds great, Matt. Something that is well needed, and like I said, excited to definitely try my best to be there and experience it. So before we go, because I've just had a little look at the clock and I feel like me and you could speak to each other all day. I think there'd be no issue with that, but we've banged out well over an hour. So just to finish off what I normally do, I can guess maybe one of the habits that you'd recommend to the everyday person, and that being journaling. But if there was two more habits that you do that you think have benefit, what would they be?
Okay, so generally, if I'm in a bad place, mentally and emotionally, there's two go-to things. Now, these might not be everyday things that you would do, but these are my solutions to get out of my own head and to contextualize my problems and my worries and my fears. The first thing is move my body, go and train, go and change my physiology to change my psychology. So the first thing I'll go and do is go and change that physical state, and that will start to change the state of my mind and my thinking. And the second thing I do is help somebody in some way. And by help, it can be something small. It can be when you go to buy your coffee, have a conversation with the person serving you, ask them how their day's going, pay them a compliment about their hair, say something that's going to make them smile, whatever it is. Your thought process then is no longer just about you and your problems, but you've connected with another human being. So they would be the two general things, like if I'm struggling, train and help somebody in some way. Get out of my own head. In terms of daily structural habits, it's journaling. First and foremost. And actually, we've not talked a lot about ourselves in relationships, but one I love in a relationship is the 6-second kiss. So it's been proven that when couples kiss each other, the couples that kiss each other for 6 seconds or more have a much greater likelihood of long-term relationship success than couples that don't, right? They've got it down to the second. So if you remember two things, lads. Right?
Yeah.
Remember to journal and kiss your missus for at least 6 seconds every day.
Well, the two daily ones that we could all easily put in, I'm sure. So the last one, and to again flip it on its head a little bit, is if there was one habit or routine that you don't do and you would like to do, or you did previously and would like to reintroduce, what would it be and why?
I would like to reintroduce and become much better at, isn't it? It's very ironic. I'm about to say become better at meditating, as if it's just an effortful, driven, striving thing, and it isn't at all about actually letting go of attachment. But yeah, I would like to meditate, and I would like to meditate to foster acceptance. I would like to be more accepting of who I am, my limitations, where I am in life, and let go of the attachments that I have to things and place. And I feel that a meditative practice would be the best kind of daily habit route to me being more accepting.
Love that. And we'll end it now, but obviously, if you don't mind, me and you will stay a little bit after we stop recording. But let people know where they can find you. Let people know where they can have this opportunity to see the excellent work that you're doing and the fantastic message that you're sharing, and get in touch with you if they're looking to be coached by you.
Sure. Thanks, Jack. I'll ask you to put the link to the event page in the show notes or somewhere else, because it's quite long and I won't read it out now. In brief, on social media, on Instagram, you can either find me as at Rory Macdonald _coach for my page, where I'm putting out a lot of the advice that you've picked up on, Jack, prior to this podcast, and the event page itself is at howtobe_man_. If you can't find those, or you want to reach out with a direct question, I will happily answer anybody's email, and they can get me Rory at rorymacdonalds.coach. Macdonald is MAC.
Perfect, and I'll put all them in the description. And yeah, I'll make sure people can find that for you.